Chapter 14, Breathing and Exchange of Gases. Oxygen is utilized by organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, etc. to derive energy to perform various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reactions. It is therefore evident that oxygen has to be continuously provided to the cells and carbon dioxide produced by the cells have to be released out. This process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cells is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Respiratory organs. Mechanisms of breathing vary among different groups of animals depending mainly upon their habitats and levels of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelenterate, flatworms, etc. exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelenterates, flatworms exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle and insects have a network of tracheal tubes to transport atmospheric air within the body. Special vascularized structures called gills. Branchial respiration. So, respiration through gills is called branchial respiration, are used by most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks. Branchial respiration are aquatic arthropods and mollusks, whereas vascularized bags called lungs, pulmonary respiration are used by terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Among vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians like frogs can respire through their moist skin, cutaneous respiration also. So, respiration through moist skin is called cutaneous respiration. Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostrils opening above the upper lips. It leads to a nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into pharynx, a portion of which is the common passage for food and air. So, a portion of pharynx is the common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx region into the trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called the sound box. During swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into right and left Each bronchi Each bronchi undergoes repeated divisions to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. Each terminal bronchioles give rise to a number of very thin, irregular, walled, and vascularized bag-like structures called alveoli. Alveoli are thin, irregular, walled, and vascularized bag-like structures. The branching network of bronchioles, and alveoli comprise the lungs. We have two lungs which are covered by a double layered pleura with pleural fluid between them. It reduces friction on the lung surface. The outer membrane pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. Outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining. Inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. The part starting with the external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and the ducts form the respiratory or exchange part of the respiratory system. The conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli. clears it from foreign particles, humidifies, and also brings the air to body temperature. Conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidifies, and also brings the air to body temperature. Exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by the dome shaped diaphragm. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by the dome shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such that any change in the volume of thoracic cavity will be reflected in the pulmonary or lung cavity. Such an arrangement is essential for breathing as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Respiration involves the following steps. Breathing of number 1, breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. 2, diffusion of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide across alveolar membrane. 3, transport of gases by the blood. 4, diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissues. 5, utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reactions and resultant release of carbon dioxide. So, what are the steps? Number 1, breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. 2, diffusion of gases, which is oxygen and carbon dioxide across alveolar membrane. 3, transport of gases by the blood. 4, diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and tissues. 5, utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reactions and resultant release of carbon dioxide. Mechanism of breathing 14.2. Breathing involves two stages: inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs, which is intrapulmonary pressure, is less than the atmospheric pressure. Means there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to atmospheric pressure. So inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs, intrapulmonary pressure, is less than the atmospheric pressure. That is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostals, between the ribs help in generation of such gradients. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increases the volume of thoracic chamber in the antero-posterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscles lift up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in the thoracic volume causes a similar increase in pulmonary volume. An increase in pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure. Means the intrapulmonary pressure becomes less than the atmospheric pressure in case of uh, inspiration. Yeah. So, to an increase in pulmonary volume decreases the pulmonary pressure to than the atmospheric pressure, so that the air from outside moves into the lungs. Relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm, means external intercostal muscles. Relaxation of the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm and sternum to their normal positions and reduce the thoracic volume and thereby the pulmonary volume. This leads to an increase in intrapulmonary pressure slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing an expulsion of air from the lungs, which is expiration. Means the pressure, air travels from high pressure to low pressure, so uh, the air gets expelled from the lungs, we have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. On an average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. The volume of air involved in breathing movements can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in clinical assessment of pulmonary functions. Respiratory volumes and capacities. Tidal volume. Volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. It is approximately 500 ml. That is, a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6000 to 8000 ml of air per minute. So it will be 12 multiplied by 500, which is 6000, and 16 multiplied by 500, which is 8000 ml of air per minute. Inspiratory reserve volume, IRV. Additional volume of air a person can inspire by a forcible inspiration. This averages 2500 ml to 3000 ml. IRV 2500 ml to 3000 ml. Tidal volume 500 ml. ERV. Now, ERV is additional volume of air a person can expire by a forcible expiration. This is 1000 ml to 1100 ml. So, 500, 2500 to 3000, and 1000 to 1100. Residual volume. Volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. This averages 1100 ml to 1200 ml. So expiratory reserve volume is 1000 to 1100 and residual is 1100 to 1200. By adding up a few respiratory volumes described above, one can derive various pulmonary capacities which can be used in clinical diagnosis. IC, which is inspiratory capacity, it is IRV plus TV, total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. This includes tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume. Total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. This includes tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume, TV plus IRV. Expiratory capacity, total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume, TV plus ERV. Total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume. FRC, functional residual capacity, volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. This is ERV plus RV. FRC is a volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. Vital capacity, maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forced expiration. This includes ERV, TV, and IRV. ERV, TV, IRV. TLC, total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of a forced inspiration. This includes RV, ERV, TV, and IRV, or vital capacity plus residual volume. So, vital capacity equals to TLC minus RV. Now, exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues, Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on pressure or concentration gradient. Solubility of the gases as well as the thickness of the membranes involved in diffusion are also some important factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. So, solubility of gases, thickness of membrane, and concentration gradient. These are the three things which can affect the rate of diffusion. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as PO2 for oxygen and PCO2 for carbon dioxide. Partial pressures of these gases, two gases in the atmospheric air, and the two sites of diffusion. So in atmospheric air, oxygen is 159. The amount of oxygen is 159. In alveoli, 104. In deoxygenated blood, 40. In oxygenated blood, 95. In tissues, 40. So 159, 104, 40, 40, 95, 40. 159, 104, 40, 95, 40. Now for CO2, 0.3 in atmospheric pressure, 40 in alveoli, in deoxygenated blood 45, in oxygenated blood 40, in tissues 45. So 0.3, 40, 45, 40, 45. So for carbon dioxide 0.3, 40, 45, 40, 45, and for oxygen 159, 104, 40, 95, 40. A gradient is present for carbon dioxide in the opposite direction from tissues to blood and blood to alveoli, and a concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to tissues is there. So concentration gradient for oxygen is from alveoli to blood and blood to tissues, and gradient for carbon dioxide is from tissues to blood and blood to alveoli. As the solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times higher than that of blood, 20 to 25 times higher, the amount of carbon dioxide that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of oxygen. The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers, namely the thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, the endothelium of alveolar capillaries, and the basement substance composed of a thin basement membrane supporting the squamous epithelium and the basement membrane surrounding the single layer endothelial cells of capillaries in between them. Uh, the three major layers are thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, endothelium of alveolar capillaries, and basement substance. Now, this basement substance is composed of thin basement membrane supporting the squamous epithelium and the basement membrane surrounding the single layer endothelial cells of capillaries. However, its total thickness is much less than a millimeter. Total thickness is much less than a millimeter. Therefore, all factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to tissues and that of carbon dioxide from tissues to alveoli. Transport of gases. Blood is the medium of transport for oxygen and carbon dioxide. About 97% of oxygen is transported by RBCs in the blood. The remaining 3% of oxygen is carried in a dissolved state through the plasma. Nearly 20 to 25% of carbon dioxide is transported by RBCs, whereas 70% of it is carried as bicarbonate. About 7% of carbon dioxide is carried in a dissolved state through plasma. Now, transport of oxygen. Hemoglobin is a red colored iron containing pigment present in the RBCs. Oxygen can bind with hemoglobin in a reversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of oxygen. Binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion, concentration, and temperature are the other factors which can interfere with this binding. A sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against partial pressure of oxygen. This curve is called the oxygen dissociation curve and is highly useful in studying the effect of factors like partial pressure of carbon dioxide, H plus concentration, etc. on binding of oxygen with hemoglobin. In the alveoli, where there is high PO2, low PCO2, lesser H plus concentration, and lower temperature, the factors are all favorable for the formation of oxyhemoglobin. Whereas in tissues where low PO2, high PCO2, high H plus concentration and high temperature exist, the conditions are favorable for dissociation of oxygen from oxyhemoglobin. This clearly indicates that oxygen gets bound to hemoglobin in the lung surface and gets dissociated at the tissues. Every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver around 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues under normal physiological conditions. Transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is carried by hemoglobin as carbaminohemoglobin about 20 to 25%. This binding is related to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of oxygen is a major factor which could affect this binding. When partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high and partial pressure of oxygen is low, as in the tissues, more binding of carbon dioxide occurs, whereas when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low and partial pressure of oxygen is high, as in the alveoli, dissociation of oxygen from carbaminohemoglobin takes place. That is, carbon dioxide, which is bound to hemoglobin from the tissues, is delivered at the alveoli. RBCs contain a very high concentration of the enzyme carbonic anhydrase, and minute quantities of the same is present in the plasma too. This enzyme facilitates the following reaction in both directions. Carbon dioxide plus water on giving carbonic anhydrase and on catalyzing it with carbonic anhydrase gives H2CO3, and again if you catalyze H2CO3 with carbonic anhydrase, HCO3 minus plus H plus, CO2 plus H2O gives H2CO3 and H2CO3 gives HCO3 minus and H plus. At the tissue site where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high due to catabolism, carbon dioxide diffuses into blood. RBCs and plasma means diffuses into blood where RBCs and plasma is present and forms HCO3 minus and H plus. At the alveolar site where PCO2 is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of CO2 and H2O. So, in where PCO2 is low, H3O, HCO3 plus H plus, this becomes H2CO3 CO3, and again this becomes CO2 plus H2O. Thus, carbon dioxide trapped as bicarbonate at the tissue level and transported to alveoli is released out as carbon dioxide. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Regulation of respiration. Human beings have a significant ability to maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm to suit the demands of the body tissues. This is done by the neural system. A specialized center present in the medulla region of the brain called respiratory rhythm center is primarily responsible for this regulation. Another center present in the pons region of the brain called pneumotaxic center can moderate the functions of the respiratory rhythm center. Neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. A chemosensitive area is situated to the rhythm center, which is highly sensitive to CO2 and hydrogen ions. Increase in the substances can activate the center, which in turn can signal the rhythm center to make necessary adjustments in the respiratory process by which these substances can be eliminated. Receptors associated with aortic arc and carotid artery can recognize changes in CO2 and H plus concentration and send necessary signals to the rhythm center for remedial actions. The role of oxygen in the regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. Respiratory rhythm regulates pneumotaxic center, moderate moderates, and chemosensitive area gets activated, and carotid artery and aortic arc can recognize the changes. Disorders of respiratory system. Asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Emphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged, due to which respiratory surface is decreased. One of the major causes of this is cigarette smoking. Emphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged, due to which respiratory surface is decreased. One of the major causes of this is cigarette smoking. Occupational respiratory disorder. In certain industries, especially those involving grinding or stone breaking, so much dust is produced that the defense mechanism of the body cannot fully cope up with the situation. Long exposure can give rise to inflammation, leading to fibrosis. Fibrosis is proliferation of fibrous tissues. Fibrosis is proliferation of fibrous tissues and thus causing serious lung damage. Workers in such industries should wear protective masks.